everybody, welcome back to the Chaotic Little Book Corner. My name's Acacia. Today my hair is wet because I just took a shower. And I'm going to be doing October Part 2 book wrap-up. I'm out of breath and I don't know why. Do you like my shirt? It says, I read because punching people is frowned upon. Yeah, that's about how my day's going. So I have put these books in a pile from least favorite to most. My bad book reading was in my readathon. The two books that I disliked the most this month were then. The book that's my least favorite here, it's not like a least favorite overall, but it's just my least favorite of the month. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So not a bad book, just not a favorite. All right, moving forward. And that one is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Now, as much as I enjoyed this, this took a few months for me because the language was so... It felt heavy. It wasn't like turn of the screw heavy, but it felt heavy, and it took me a while to get into the place where I understood what was happening. So the concept of this book is pretty simple in terms of what you're being told the concept of this book is. But once you dive into the book, you realize that there's so much more like underlayering secrety stuff that you're like, oh my gosh, my head's about to explode. And that was kind of where I was, is that I went into this thinking I was going to be reading a chill, cozy, warm fire kind of read. And while it was that, it had so much complexity that I couldn't sit down and read this for 6 hours straight without having a headache. So that was a real bummer for me because I would have gotten through it a lot quicker if that hadn't been the situation. So the concept of this is there's a gentleman who starts seeing a woman in white, and the woman in white's presence keeps following him around, and then he finds out she's escaped from an asylum, and the story goes from there. That's all I'm going to tell you, because this is the kind of asylum-esque madness story that I've enjoyed versus two that I read earlier, versus two that I read in the month during the readathon. Make sense? Yes. Then we have, this one I really enjoyed. It just wasn't as good as the others. I'm really tied between this one and the next one as far as enjoyment, which one I liked better and which one I didn't. This one is Shelter in Place by Alexander Maxick. This book is really interesting. This was sent to me from Europa Publishing, and it was a review for me, and of course unsolicited, nope, that's not right. So of course it's like I'm not paid for it or anything, so this is all my real opinions, all honest. You guys know this. Yeah, I went into this thinking it was going to be a little more about the mental illness factors of the life than the mystery aspect of the life, but it did really well for what it was. This is the story of a young man whose mother suffers from mental illness, and he suffers from a similar mental illness, and his mother ends up killing someone, and his girlfriend now believes that she can convince him kind of to do the same thing. And it's really, really... It kind of like, it grabbed me, and it made me really uncomfy, but in like a good reader way. Like it really it gave me this feeling of unease and weirdness, and like wasn't really sure which narrator I trusted as far as like whose voice was like really telling me the truth. And yeah, it was just really, really weird. And the story is definitely focused more around the bipolar aspect of this character, and because of his bipolar illness, which has now taken over his life, I think I was a little invested in it more than a normal person would be, or more than a neurotypical person might be, or maybe even more than some people with mental illness that are still functioning, maybe, because I'm right now having to like take my whole life and put it on hold because of my mental illness. And so this talks a lot more about that kind of feeling where the past and traumas and illness put you on hold for your life. And that was a really hard thing to read, but really good, if that makes sense. Like, it hit me at the right time in the right place, but it still made me uncomfortable and uneasy, but good way. Yeah. Then we read, well, yeah. Then we read Misfit by Adam Braver. This is a Tin House book. I was not sent this. This one I purchased myself. This is the story of Marilyn Monroe in her last week on an island trying to take a vacation. And you're going back and forth between her and current day when she's on this island kind of trying to reassess her life and figure her stuff out, and then flashing back to her life as a child and moving forward to like the point where you are now, where the times meet. I really love Marilyn Monroe. She's a hero of mine. I don't think this book would really appeal to a person who's not a Marilyn Monroe fan already. A person who's kind of iffy on Marilyn may not really enjoy this because it dives into a lot of speculation about what her life was, but not really, because it's like a non-fiction fictional. It's very weird. You kind of know if you're I'm a Marilyn lover, so I had some facts that I knew were true, and then there were definitely some moments where you realized that they were being not stretched. The truth was never stretched, but it was like they were kind of imagining the moment kind of thing. And that I really enjoyed, while at the same time felt really, really sad, because this is really the story about how damaged Norma Jean was. This little girl who turns into Marilyn Monroe. Norma Jean, the person who Marilyn Monroe is, the name that Marilyn Monroe is born with, Norma Jean. This little girl is so damaged by the fact that her mother abandons her. She's mentally ill. There's all this trouble and this stigma around how her mother behaves and how people think that Marilyn's going to do the same thing. There's a lot of slut shaming around that. Like, it's just really interesting, and it's a nice way to kind of dive into what her life might have felt like, but at the same time not claiming that it's exactly true, if that makes sense. So I really enjoyed it, but if you're not a Marilyn fan, it may not go the way you want it to. These two I'm going to put together because they were rereads. I enjoyed them equally. This is Alice Thompson, the book collector. This is The Girl Who Circumvented Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. Both of these were rereads. Both are cozy fall reads. I think they'll probably be something I'll read around the fall once a year. If you want to hear my thoughts more in depth on these, let me know, but I've already read them and I've spoken about them multiple times in past videos, so I'm gonna just move through. Then this is A Green and Ancient Light. I was supposed to buddy read this with somebody, but it fell through and I ended up reading it by myself. I feel really bad because I wanted to buddy read with this person, but I never heard from them, and then I kind of dropped the ball on writing to them as well because my head got too chaotic, and so I feel really bad, and I will hope to read a buddy read with that person later on. But this book was staring me in the face, and I really wanted to read it right in the beginning of September or the end. And then when I didn't hear from them, it moved into October. So it worked really well, actually. This is definitely a fall read for me. This is a fairy tale-esque fantasy that I really enjoyed. It has these weird... So it starts with a little boy having been taken from his home and brought to his grandmother's because war has become an issue in the surroundings around him outside of his grandmother's village. And in this time, he's brought to his grandmother's. A plane from the opposite side crashes in the lake right near his home, and there's a mix between magical realism fantasy fairy tales and then things that he's seeing. So it's this historical fiction melded with fantasy, which is really, really beautiful. And I think the reason I love this so much, it was compared to Pan's Labyrinth. And while I don't think that the imagery is exactly like the Pan's Labyrinth film, I think that the concept of a child in wartime functioning around the idea of fairy tales was really well executed, and I adored it. I am not a big fantasy person, but for some reason this month and last month I've gotten really into fantasy because I think I'm finding my niches. And I've got a little more disconcerting about which ones I sit down and read, which has helped immensely. If you want me to do a video talking about my experience with fantasy and how I find fantasies and how I really hone in on what I'm looking for, let me know, and I'll tell you in the comments, and I'll tell you in a video later, but let me know in the comments below. But I did enjoy that quite a bit. And then, of course, I needed to scare myself a little, so I did. This is The Haunting of Hill House. Now, the reason, and this is by Shirley Jackson. Now, first of all, I plan to pick up more Shirley Jackson's work. I really enjoy Shirley Jackson. I didn't know I enjoyed Shirley Jackson until recently. I read The Lottery when I was younger, and I enjoyed it, but I kind of forgot about it, and now I have We've Always Lived on a Castle on my shelf. I tried it once. I didn't get into it, but this one really grabbed me. This one I saw on Mercedes' channel talking about how this is one of her favorite horror reads, but it's not really horror. It's more of a madness, weirdness kind of story, and it is. The thing that I really, really don't know, because I can't tell how everyone else's brain works except for my own, I was so immersed in this book that I felt that I was in this house that was making me mad. Now, that was good and bad for me. It was a really, really weird experience. I was constantly feeling like the walls in my own house were moving. I was constantly feeling like things were getting weirder and weirder. I ended up reading outside a lot, just to try and get myself fresh air and feel like I wasn't so claustrophobic. I really, really enjoyed it. This is just a really good haunted house book, and it's different than a lot of other ones because it's not so slice and dice and weirdness. It's not so current day horror house. It's kind of the original that inspired all of those, which really, really is interesting because it's a female horror writer who inspires people like Stephen King and so on and so forth. And I don't feel like there's a lot of credit given to her in a lot of mainstream conversations, and I think there should be. So I'm hoping to look into more of her work. And then we have The Leper Compound, and this is the story of a young girl who it's memoir slash fiction, so it's basically a character based similarly around her. The author, Paula Nagel, is a Nangle. Is a young girl who grew up between the US and a missionary place in Africa. Now, she saw some really horrific things and graphic things, and that's very clear in this book. She writes a story in this about a young girl named Colleen, and Colleen lives on the missionary, and she has a sister with schizophrenia who has been separated from her. Now, the separation is actually really detrimental to the sisters because the sister with schizophrenia is very connected to Colleen, and Colleen is very connected to her, and there's a communication that they have that they really can't find anywhere else. So it was really hard to read that part because I felt very much like there was abuse of this woman with schizophrenia, but at the same time, there was this element of them trying to protect her from 1980s Africa and this very different. It was a really interesting conversation about what is the right thing to do with a person with mental illness in a crisis, if that makes sense. There's some really interesting stories in here and conversations about human identity. There's also some really great mentions of really historical moments in 1980s Africa and racial discrimination and things of that nature. I spent a lot of time in this book stopping and going to look up references, and I really enjoy that. I like learning. So this caused me to stop what I was reading, go and read the reference about the person mentioned or so on and so forth. If you're not interested in having that kind of researched reading experience, this is not going to be the right book for you unless you know a lot about the African history. Um, if you do, it's a fantastic book. If you're interested in the research, it's wonderful. I really enjoyed it, and I will definitely reread it to get a more cohesive idea of what happened, because I feel like when I would break, sometimes I lose the momentum. This was sent to me by Bellevue Literary Press, and I already love them because I read Bob Stevenson, I believe it's called, and they sent me a full final copy of that, which I'm so excited about, and I'm in love with it. But they sent me this and another book that I'll be reading next month, and I will be reviewing that and this because they're intertwined in a weird way, but they are intertwined. So I'm very excited, and I really enjoyed that, and I definitely, oh, it was wonderful. So then I read Museum of You. Now, this is by Kara Spray. A lot of people have been talking about this. I'm really enjoying it, really loving it. I did. I really enjoyed it. I really loved it. However, I wouldn't put as much hype on it as there's been in my mind. I read it because I picked it up because, one, I loved the end papers, and two, it sounded and felt like something, it was just drawing me in, and it felt like it was something kind of easy and soft-spoken and fun to read. Now, it's about a young girl who has a mother who's passed away, and she decides to make a museum out of her mother's things in a room in her home. The father is trying to maintain a job, taking care of his little girl, taking care of an elderly father, and taking care of a mentally ill in-law sibling. And I felt like there was a lot of good conversation surrounding the idea of family mentality. I felt there was a lot of good conversation surrounding the idea of grief and loss and communication within a family. I, however, felt that there could have been a it touched the surface, but it didn't dive deeper for me, if that makes sense. I didn't feel the depth that I wanted to feel, and that made me kind of sad. When I went into it, I was thinking it wasn't going to be deep at all, and that was fine. But then as I continued reading, I wanted more. Like, I wanted to go deeper with it. I didn't really like the surface area, but that's because of the mentally ill character, and I wanted more information. Like, there was a whole bunch of stuff that in it, for me, made me want to know more deeper into the family information. So that was really my only struggle. But all in all, I really liked it. But it was a struggle because for what it was a fantastic read, and I really loved it and everything. If I could have changed anything, I would have wanted more information. Does that make sense? Like, it was a great read for what it was, but there was more. Anyway. And then I will link my review of this down below. Our Hearts Will Burn Us Down. And this is by Anne Valenti. This is the author of By Lights We Knew Our Name. That is a short story collection that I found from Mercedes' channel. And then I found out that this was being released. And then I pre-ordered it a year ago. And now it's finally out. And I finally read it. I read it in one day. It was incredible. I loved it. It's the story of a mass shooting. And then things start to go weird in the town, revolving around the families whose children died in the shooting. Really, really good book. I'll link my full in-depth review down below, for sure. And then last but not least, this is not a most enjoyed. This is not least enjoyed. It is what it is, and I don't want to put a label on it as far as enjoyment went, because I don't feel like it's my place, and I don't feel like it's a situation where it is an enjoyable read. It's as far as like, oh, this made me happy, or oh, this made me, feel something. This made me angry. This made me feel frustrated. This made me feel a little helpless, and it made me feel really constricted as far as what I can do to change things. This is Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is Between the Words and Me. This is the letter of a black man writing to his son, telling him about his place in America, I believe. Yeah. His place in America as a black man. This conversation has been something that's fascinated me for a while now, and it really has me kind of Mm. I really, really hate what's happening right now to the African American culture, um, to the black culture here in America. And I feel like there's so much more I could be doing, but I don't know what to do. And this book just made me feel more like I needed to do something, but I still don't know what to do. As a white woman in a middle class family, even though I am technically a white woman of I so if we go by the bracket of me as a single person in a household, I am on the really low end of income, like so bad, and so that's a problem. But if we go by like what I'm living in situational wise, because I have a family that's middle class, I'm okay. I don't know what I can do to help the cause of Black Lives Matter. All I can do, I think, is raise awareness and just continue to be kind to everybody. If anyone has any recommendations or any input on that, let me know, because I actually do want to be an active participant in change on that front, as well. I mean, I want to be an active participant in the change of how Black lives are treated, in how the stigma of mental illness comes across, and how females are treated. And I feel like those are three things that I can really focus on. I really wish to make one thing clear though, and this is not to take away from the conversation of Black Lives, because absolutely high on my list. There's been some comments towards me discussing how I can better verbalize the inclusiveness of all genders, including transgenders, and how I can word that. Now, while I appreciate the information being relayed to me, with my past trauma around bullying, I am open to suggestion and communication, but please email me the information as follows about how I could come across better in private, because to me, when it is placed on a video, it feels like an attack more than a constructive criticism, and I respond very poorly to feeling attacked. So, that is my only thing. If anyone has any complaints, compliments, or construction based around how I can further develop my verbiage as far as gender or race equality, please let me know by emailing me. I'll link my email below. Please don't directly comment on my video, because it feels shaming to me, and I know that you are not trying to shame me, and that is completely on me as far as the feeling, and as far as the past that I have. The past is not on me. Let me just make that out there. But the past has definitely affected my ability to accept that kind of conversation in a confronting manner. Emailing me is a much more private matter, and by putting it into a private setting, I am much more open to the conversation, because I don't feel like I'm back at school where kids would yell at me that I was stupid. Basically, I don't really know how else to explain it, but like if I answered a question in class and one of the kids would be like, "That's fucking dumb." Okay, well, that really kind of comes back up when I hear someone comment about how I said something wrong. And you know, if you are a true follower of mine and a really avid subscriber, I never meant to or mean to harm or upset anyone. And so I want to learn how to not upset, but I don't want to feel like my learning is shameful. Does that make sense? I hope that that came off the way I wanted it to, and not in a bratty way. I'm really not trying to make any problems, but this is just something that's been bothering me because it's happened multiple times. I've had to delete 3 comments in the past for kind of more aggressive ways of putting it, at how I could verbalize things. And I did email that person in private, and I asked them if they wanted to voice their opinion. They didn't want to voice it in private, which to me felt more attacking than it would have if they just accepted my email. So please just note, if you wish to give me critiquing on my verbiage, I am open, but I would prefer to do it in a private setting where you and I can communicate one-on-one and I don't feel as if I'm being shamed on my own channel. All right. I will see you guys in the next video, regardless of how weird that turn was. I kind of had to get it out. So I will talk to you guys soon. I love you all. Bye.